Welcome back to another deep dive. You guys have sent in some really cool thoughts this time around. We're jumping back into The Great Gatsby with part two. And, well, Fitzgerald really brings the drama, doesn't he? Mystery and money and the roaring 20s, it's all there.
Yeah, you said it's like we're stepping right into one of Gatsby's parties, trying to figure out who's who and what's really going on behind all the glitz and glamour.
Right. And speaking of figuring things out, one character that keeps coming up in your notes is Daisy Buchanan. You know, she's charming, but there are these hints that there's something more to her than meets the eye.
Yeah, Fitzgerald even says she has this, basic insincerity. He describes her with this smirk that makes you wonder what she's really thinking.
Almost like she's always putting on a show, like she's performing, but for who? I mean, Bobby even mentioned the idea that maybe Daisy's putting on an act to protect herself in this world where men hold all the power.
That's a really interesting point. You know, the 1920s were a time of huge change, but women were still expected to be wives and mothers above all else. So maybe Daisy's performance is her way of navigating a society that doesn't really let her be herself.
It makes you wonder how much of Daisy is genuine and how much is all carefully crafted, right? Like if we're all trying to figure out Gatsby, maybe we need to understand Daisy first.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting. This ambiguity makes Daisy a perfect character for what we call rhetorical analysis. It's like she's constantly challenging us to question our assumptions about her.
Okay, I think we need to unpack that a bit. Rhetorical analysis, it sounds a little intimidating. What exactly does that mean when we're talking about a character like Daisy?
Well, think of it this way. Rhetoric is basically the art of persuasion. So when we analyze a character like Daisy rhetorically, we're looking at how they use language actions, even their appearance, to influence others.
So we're not just looking at what Daisy says, but how she says it, her body language, her fashion choices even. Right.
Exactly. It's like piecing together a puzzle. Each detail, each carefully chosen word or gesture gives us a clue about her true motives. Like that smirk Fitzgerald describes it, suggests that she might be more cunning than she lets on.
And speaking of clues, we can't forget about that iconic green light at the end of Daisy's dock. It's practically a character itself.
It really is. It's such a brilliant symbol that works on so many different levels. At the surface, it represents Gatsby's yearning for Daisy, this impossible dream he's chasing. But it also speaks to the allure of wealth and status, which Daisy, as a woman of her time, is very aware of.
Right. Bobby even compared it to a beacon, a sort of signal fire, saying that maybe it's Daisy who's sending out a distress call.
I love that interpretation because it suggests that Daisy might feel trapped in her own life, longing for something more, just like Gatsby. It completely changes the perspective.
Totally. It makes you wonder if Gatsby's chasing after Daisy or if he's chasing after an idea of her, this perfect vision of the past that he's built up in his mind. But you mentioned the green light also works on another level, something about triangulation.
Right. Bobby brought up this really fascinating analogy with the North Star. You know how sailors use the North Star and two other points to navigate? Well, we can do the same thing with the Great Gatsby. We can use the green light Gatsby and our narrator Nick Carraway as our 3 points.
Okay, I'm following. So no matter what crazy parties Gatsby throws or what secrets get revealed, if we keep those 3 points in mind,
we can track how things change between them. We can understand their motivations. And ultimately, we can navigate the emotional landscape of the story. It's like Fitzgerald is giving us a secret map to the heart of the novel.
That's brilliant. It's like we're not just passively reading the story, we're actively uncovering its deeper meaning. And speaking of uncovering meaning, those giant disembodied eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg staring down on everyone, that's another image you all picked up on.
Yeah, those eyes are really unsettling, aren't they? They work on so many levels. On one hand, they represent our own limited perspective as readers. We only see things through Nick Carraway's eyes.
It's like we're getting a filtered version of the story, which in a way makes it even more intriguing.
Exactly. But the eyes also symbolize this sense of judgment, this moral compass overlooking the character's actions. And the fact that they're placed in the Valley of Ashes, this desolate wasteland, well, it adds another layer of meaning.
Yeah, it's like Fitzgerald is saying that even in this era of excess and wealth, you can't escape the consequences of your actions. It's a pretty powerful image.
It really is. It makes you wonder if those eyes are judging not just the characters, but also the society they represent. A society obsessed with material wealth and superficiality.
Right. And speaking of consequences, we can't ignore that brutal moment when Tom breaks Myrtle's nose. It's such a shocking act of violence that really reveals his true character.
It's a disturbing scene, and what's even more disturbing is how matter-of-factly Fitzgerald describes it. It really says a lot about the casual brutality and the norms of the 1920s. I mean, domestic violence wasn't taken as seriously then as it is today.
It makes you question the morality of these characters and the world they live in. It's like Fitzgerald is peeling back this glamorous facade to reveal a darker reality underneath.
It raises a really important question for you to think about as you keep reading. How does this event change how you see Tom? And how does it affect how you view the other characters who see it happen but don't say anything?
That's something I'm definitely going to be thinking about. And since we're talking about peeling back facades, maybe it's time to dive into the world of Gatsby's legendary parties. They're like something out of a movie.
Those parties are more than just lavish gatherings. They're a microcosm of the Roaring Twenties. Remember how Bobby compared Gatsby to modern-day figures like Bruce Wayne or Elon Musk?
Yeah, it's that same fascination with immense wealth, the power it represents, and the possibilities it seems to unblock.
Exactly. And it's interesting because those parties attract all sorts of people. The wealthy, the hopeful, the curious, those seeking escape. They all flock to Gatsby's mansion, hoping to a taste of his seemingly perfect life.
It's almost like they're looking for a piece of the American dream, but are they actually finding it? Or is it just another illusion? That's what I'm really curious to explore as we continue our deep dive.
It's a great question to keep in mind, because those parties are filled with more than just champagne and laughter. They're also filled with secrets, hidden motives, and maybe even a growing sense of disillusionment.
It's wild to think about all those people coming and going like moths to a flame. But there's also this underlying tension, the sense of unease, especially when you think about the different social groups at play.
Right. It's not just about having fun. It's about who's invited, where they stand in the social hierarchy, and what they represent. Remember we talked about the East Egg, West Egg thing?
Oh yeah, it's not just about geography, it's a whole social structure, old money versus new money, all those unspoken rules.
Exactly. Fitzgerald uses Gatsby's parties to really highlight that divide. You've got the East Eggers representing this established social order, and then you've got Gatsby, this self-made millionaire trying to break into their world.
Like he's trying to buy his way in, throwing these huge parties to impress them. But does it work? Do the East Eggers actually accept Gatsby?
That's the big question, isn't it? On the surface, yeah. They came to his parties, drink his champagne, but there's always this sense of distance, this subtle judgment. They might be curious about him, but they don't really see him as one of their own.
It's like he's always on the outside looking in, no matter how much money he has. It makes you think about the limits of the American dream.
It does. Gatsby's story shows that just because you achieve material success doesn't mean you'll find social acceptance or true happiness. He might have the mansion, the cars, the parties, but he's still looking for something more. Something money can't buy.
And that something more could be Daisy, right? Her being at those parties, even if it's just for a little while, it adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Absolutely. It highlights that tension between Gatsby's desire to be accepted and his longing for Daisy. Like he's trying to win her back not just with his wealth, but by proving he can fit into her world.
Makes you wonder if Gatsby's really in love with Daisy, or just the idea of her, this perfect version of the past he's holding on to.
It's a fascinating question. And remember, we're only seeing their interactions through Nick's eyes, which adds to that ambiguity. What do you think, based on what you've read so far? Is Gatsby's love real, or is it something else entirely?
I'm still trying to figure that out, but while we're talking about perception and reality, we gotta talk about all those rumors flying around about Gatsby. It's like everyone has a different theory about his past. A murderer, a German spy, a war hero.
It's like a game of telephone. The more the story gets passed around, the more it changes. And the fact that we don't know anything for sure about Gatsby's past, well, it just makes him more mysterious. It lets people project their own ideas onto him.
Like he's a blank canvas and then everyone's painting their own version of Gatsby based on what they want to see. Why do you think Fitzgerald waited so long to tell us about Gatsby's past?
Because it keeps us guessing, it pulls us into the story. He makes us question everything we think we know about Gatsby, just like Nick does.
We're all like amateur detectives trying to put the pieces together, but the more we learn, the more complicated it gets.
Exactly, and this goes back to that idea of limited perspective. We're only getting a glimpse of the truth through Nick's eyes and his interpretation.
Makes you realize there's always more to the story than what you see on the surface. Which I guess is true about life too, isn't it?
Absolutely. And speaking of hidden truths, we can't forget about those all-seeing eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg looming over everything. You all had some really interesting thoughts about what we represent.
Those eyes are creepy. They seem to be everywhere watching, judging, like they represent this higher power, this moral compass looking down on this world of excess and corruption.
That's a great interpretation, and the fact that they're in the Valley of Ashes, this wasteland of broken dreams and lost hope, it adds a whole other layer of meaning.
Right, like Fitzgerald is contrasting the shallowness and moral decay of the rich elite with the struggles of those who have been left behind in the chase for the American dream.
It's a reminder that money doesn't equal morality, and those eyes, they seem to be silently judging everyone, no matter how rich or powerful they are.
Makes you wonder if anyone in this story can escape their judgment, or if they're all going to end up being judged by them.
That's something to think about as we keep going, because as the story unfolds, we'll see what happens as a result of the choices the characters make, and those eyes will be there watching it all.
It's funny, isn't it? We're talking about this book from almost 100 years ago, but it still feels so relevant. All these characters trying to project a certain image, but underneath it all, there's this sense of emptiness, this feeling of being lost.
Yeah, Fitzgerald was really good at capturing that. Like he's peeling back the layers of society, exposing the emptiness that can exist even when you have all the money and glamour in the world. Think about Gatsby and his parties. His whole persona, it's all so carefully constructed. But is it really making him happy?
That's what I keep wondering. Is Gatsby actually fulfilled by this life he's built? Or is he just chasing after something that he can never really have?
Well, remember we talked about how Gatsby is a master of rhetoric, how he uses language and gestures to persuade people, to create this image of success and sophistication.
It's almost like he's selling a product or a lifestyle, this vision of himself that might not even be real.
Right. And that hangs into his pursuit of Daisy. He's trying to win her back, not just with his wealth, but also by creating this image of himself as someone worthy of her love, someone who belongs in her world.
But is it genuine? Or is it just another part of the facade? I can't shake that feeling.
It's the big question at the heart of the novel. And as you keep reading, I want you to pay attention to how Gatsby acts around Daisy. Look past the grand gestures, the romantic speeches. What do you see? Is there a real connection there, or is it something else, like a sense of desperation, a longing for something that's lost forever?
I like that. You're right. It's like we have to become more perceptive, just like Nick, and start looking for those little cracks in the facade, because the more we learn about Gatsby's past, the more we see that his present might be built on lies.
Exactly, and that's where this idea of moral decay really comes into play. It's not just Gatsby who's caught up in this web of illusion, Tom, Daisy, Jordan. They're all part of this world where right and wrong get blurred, where wealth and status seem to justify everything.
Like they've lost their way, blinded by their own desires and this lifestyle.
And remember those eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, always watching, judging. It's like Fitzgerald is reminding us that even in this world where money and status are everything, there's still a sense of morality, a reckoning that you can't escape.
You can try to hide from the truth, bury it under parties and fancy clothes, but it always finds a way to come out.
Right. And as the story goes on, we see the consequences of the choices these characters make. Secrets come out, relationships fall apart, and the illusion of happiness is shattered.
Like the party's finally over, and now they have to deal with the consequences.
It makes me think, is it all worth it in the end? Is this pursuit of the American dream actually a path to happiness, or is it just leading to disappointment?
That's the question Fitzgerald leaves us with, and it's one we're still asking today. What are we willing to give up for our dreams? And what happens when those dreams turn out to be illusions?
The Great Gatsby doesn't give us easy answers, but it makes us think about these big questions. It challenges us to look deeper, to question our own values, and to think about the impact of our choices.
It's a book that stays with you, and I think the insights you've all shared will become even clearer as you keep reading.
I agree. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those notes coming. We'll be back soon with another deep dive, but until then, happy reading, everyone.